Welcome to class.
Hey folks, today we're going to go over variables. You've probably seen them some in your math classes. It'll be similar but a little bit different. We'll be going over what is a variable. We'll go over built-in versus user-defined variables. We will talk about some different types of variables that you'll use very soon. And then we'll talk about how to use variables in programming. All right, let's get started. Okay, what is a variable? A variable is a place to store information. In math class, it's always been X, Y, or Z, but really a variable is a place to store information. One silly example is menu item number 3. If you go to a restaurant that has numbered items on the menu and you say, I want item number 3, they'll understand what you want and they'll bring you whatever it is that is in the place of menu item 3. Other things that we can represent with variables may be your location or your speed, or in processing, the width of your canvas. One really nice thing about processing that you're going to enjoy is all the built-in variables. These built-in variables are things that someone else anticipated you wanting to use, and so they put them in there. For example, when you're drawing a picture, you're going to want to keep track of the size of your canvas. How wide is it and how tall is it? You'll want to keep track of the mouse location because you'll very soon want to make interactive programs. And so they have built-in variables that keep track of where the mouse cursor is over the canvas. User-defined variables are just ones that you make. And we'll go over how to name these and how to use them in just a moment. The first two variable types you're going to use in this class are integers and floating point numbers. Integers are just whole numbers, negative and positive. Floating point numbers, or floats, are any time you think you might need to have a decimal or a fraction of a number, you need to use a float, including pi or 0.5, anything like that. All right, now we're going to actually use some variables. The first thing that you have to do when you're going to use a variable in processing is declare it. You have to declare what type of variable it's going to be. So if you look up top where it says int box width and then int box height, that's where I'm telling processing that I'm going to use two variables. One is box width, the other is box height, and they're both going to be integers. And now if you look a little below on lines 9 and 10, you'll see that I'm initializing, or giving those variables their first values. You have to give a variable a value in order to use it. So I'm assigning some numbers to those variables. You can think of the equal sign as the word is. So for example, box width is, and then there's a number to tell you how wide. It is possible to simultaneously declare and initialize a variable. If you look just a little below, it says int greyscale equals 0. By saying int grayscale, I'm declaring that this variable will be an integer, and then saying equals 0, I'm initializing that value to 0. And now here's something cool I can do with these variables. Since I input diameter instead of numbers for the ellipses, width, and height, when I go back up to the top and I change the value for diameter, then the next time processing runs this sketch, that value will get fed into the function to draw an ellipse. And now we see a totally different ellipse. Now I want to show you a function that requires the use of a float. In order to get a random number, you have to use a floating point decimal. And what we're going to do is get the x position and y position for an ellipse and get random numbers between 0 and 500 for both of those variables. So you see where it says xpos equals random 0, 500. That is the command that will give you a random value between 0 and 500. And I'm doing that for both x and y. And then I'm using them in the x and y locations for the ellipse there at the bottom. And now every time we run that sketch, the ellipse should show up in a different spot. All right, a couple of things to keep in mind with variables. The first is you have these 3 steps you always have to do: declare, initialize, and use in processing. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind is that you have to name your variables well. If you just go and give a variable some random name like A or B or C, and then later you can't figure out what's going wrong in your problem and you ask me for help, I might ask you what that variable means. And if you've given it a name that doesn't describe what it does, it's going to be very difficult to figure out what's going wrong with that variable. So for example, you saw all of my variable names were very descriptive. I'll expect you to follow that policy also in this class. All right, here is your homework on variables. I want for you to go to the processing.org website and then search for variables. You can also just Google processing variables and you'll end up at this page. And what I want you to do is copy the example code that's there for variables. You'll see it says int A, int B, int C, into your own processing sketch and run it. Then what I'd like for you to do is rename variable A to be something a little more reasonable once you've figured out what it means. And finally, what I'd like for you to do is change those 3 variables until you have a picture of your own. That's it for variables for now. I'll see you in class.